Hey everyone, we're starting tonight with the medieval world, a place where half of daily life was made up on the spot, and the other half was the result of someone forgetting to undo something they did 300 years earlier. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval town crier was never meant to be a full-time profession. In theory, he was supposed to shout just one urgent message, something like, "The mill is on fire," or "Please stop throwing rotten fish at the tax collector," and then fade quietly back into obscurity. But medieval Europe had a fatal flaw. Almost nobody could read. A beautifully handwritten royal decree was basically decoration. Most people looked at parchment the way a cow looks at a chessboard, with polite confusion. So, towns improvised. They pointed at the loudest man they could find, handed him a bell, and said, "Just yell everything for us." Temporary, simple, practical. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a one-off emergency messenger became the medieval equivalent of a government-issued megaphone. The first time the crier made an announcement, people gathered immediately, not because they cared what he said, but because noise attracted medieval peasants the way glowing screens attract us today. Once towns realized how efficient this was, literacy programs vanished faster than a loaf of bread during a famine. Suddenly, the crier was responsible for every piece of public information: new laws, market days, missing livestock, incoming merchants, suspicious weather events, reminders to boil water unless you enjoyed illness. He didn't just break news, he broke silence permanently. He'd march into the marketplace at sunrise, medieval rush hour, ring a bell loud enough to make infants reconsider being born, and shout, "Hear ye," which was medieval for, "Attention citizens, I am now ruining your morning." And people accepted it. They depended on it. The town crier was their news feed, Siri, emergency alert system, and neighborhood gossip rolled into one sleep-deprived human. Even when towns considered replacing him with posted notices, peasants protested. They didn't want to walk to a board, squint at uncomfortable scribbles, or try reading while holding 12 potatoes and a chicken. So the temporary messenger got a uniform, a salary, legal authority, and job security so strong it could survive plagues, famines, and incompetent kings. Some families even turned it into a dynasty. Imagine inheriting the family business of being extremely loud. In the end, the town crier stayed for centuries because medieval Europe discovered a truth still relevant today. Why read when a man with a bell can yell it at you? The medieval world had a simple solution for losing things. Attach a bell to it. Livestock wandering off? Bell. Children wandering off? Bell. Nobles wanting everyone to know they existed? Absolutely. A bell. Several, actually. It all started innocently enough. Farmers put bells on cows so they wouldn't disappear into the forest and start a new life. Simple, sensible, temporary. Just a small hack to keep track of wandering beef. But medieval Europe had a dangerous habit. Once something worked once, everyone adopted it immediately and never questioned it again. So, bells spread like a medieval fashion virus. Soon, goats had bells, sheep had bells, horses had bells. One chronicler even complained that he couldn't sleep because the night air did jingle most annoyingly. Congratulations, you've invented the world's first unwanted notification system. Then someone, likely a very tired parent, said the fateful words, what if we put a bell on the toddler? And just like that, medieval childcare improved by 20%. You always knew where the small human was, or at least which direction the jingling was fading toward. The problem, of course, came when the toddler realized the bell made noise and began running simply to hear it ring, forcing the parent into medieval interval training. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Nobles got involved, and nobles ruin everything by making it fashionable. They started attaching decorative bells to cloaks, boots, belts, hats, horse harnesses, and in some cases sleeves, because nothing says "I'm important" like jingling every time you move your elbow. By the late medieval period, the wealthy had turned themselves into mobile wind chimes. Walking into court sounded like someone shaking a bag of coins. Fashionable, maybe. Practical? Absolutely not. Imagine trying to sneak anywhere when you jingle like an overly dramatic house cat. And then came the jesters, who took bells to their logical conclusion. If one bell is good, 2 bells are better, 27 bells are perfection. Every time a jester moved, entire ecosystems fled the area. Over time, bells became normalized that people forgot they were originally a temporary tracking device. They became tradition, part of daily life, part of fashion, part of the soundscape of medieval towns, right up there with shouting merchants, squawking geese, and one guy coughing ominously in the corner. Bells stayed because medieval people discovered a truth modern parents deeply understand. If something moves and makes noise, at least you know where it is. Bread in medieval Europe wasn't just food. It was breakfast, lunch, dinner, political propaganda, an economic indicator, and occasionally a blunt object. Bread ruled everything. So when famine hit, kings and city councils scrambled to impose temporary bread laws, quick fixes to stabilize prices, prevent riots, and make it look like the government was doing something except hunting and arguing about taxes. These temporary bread laws were supposed to be short-term emergency measures, just a few rules to get through a bad harvest, a little don't charge people 12 chickens for a loaf kind of thing. Except medieval governments had the same weakness as modern ones. Once they make a law, they never remember to undo it. So the temporary bread laws stayed and became permanent fixtures of medieval life, whether people liked it or not. The most famous example is England's assize of bread and ale, a rule created during food shortages saying bakers could not overcharge, underweight, or otherwise scam disparate customers. Sensible, temporary, helpful. And then the government said, actually, let's keep this forever, until the end of time or until Britain invents supermarkets, whichever comes first. This single temporary law lasted 600 years, far outliving the kings who wrote it, the bakers who hated it, and the peasants who pretended they didn't understand it. The law was so detailed it bordered on comedy. It regulated bread size, bread weight, bread price, what ingredients you could use, what ingredients you couldn't use, how drunk the ale merchant was allowed to be. Answer, not very. A baker could be fined, shamed, imprisoned, or thrown onto a medieval version of Yelp reviews if their loaf was even slightly too small. Forget burning down a village, that was practically negotiable, but selling a light loaf, straight to jail. The bread police, yes, that was a real job, patrolled markets, weighing loaves like medieval personal trainers checking for cheating. The tragedy? The famine ended, the shortages ended, but the bread laws were still there, breathing heavily over bakers' shoulders like an overprotective grandmother. Medieval people accepted it because tradition is stronger than logic, and because bread riots were terrifying. Angry mobs armed with stale loaves were not to be underestimated. So a temporary regulation intended to stop chaos became one of Europe's longest-lasting, most micromanaging laws, all because nobody wanted to say, hey, do we still need this? Straw in tavern floors began as one of those charming medieval temporary ideas that should have lasted one single evening and then politely exited history. Some innkeeper preparing for a feast or festival scattered clean straw across the floor to absorb spilled ale, mask questionable smells, and give the place a rustic, cozy atmosphere. The guests loved it, or more accurately, they were too intoxicated to complain. The innkeeper woke up the next morning, surveyed the scene of destruction, and realized something miraculous. The straw had absorbed everything: the ale, the mud, the tears, the mysterious puddles that no one could identify. It was nature's medieval cleaning product. All he had to do was rake it up and replace it. Perfect, short-term solution. But medieval innkeepers, being medieval, took this as a sign from heaven. If straw made cleanup easier once, why not always? Why not keep the floors permanently covered in something visitors couldn't see through, smell through, or judge too harshly? So, temporary decoration became a lifestyle choice. Soon, travelers expected taverns to have straw on the floor. If you entered a medieval inn and saw bare wood, something was terribly wrong. Either you'd wandered into a noble establishment where they frowned upon fun, or the place had recently been robbed and the straw stolen for wealth. Straw became part of the tavern identity, as essential as the bar, the ale, and at least one man in the corner who definitely wasn't sleeping, just resting his eyes. Over time, the straw layer thickened. New straw was thrown on top of old straw, more drinks were spilled, more boots tracked in mud, more arguments ended in overturned tankards. Eventually, tavern floors developed geological layers like an archaeological site, each stratum telling the story of last night's questionable decisions. The smell did not improve, but medieval people were trained professionals in ignoring smells. Their homes smelled of smoke, livestock, sweat, and occasionally despair. A little tavern straw odor didn't even register on their olfactory scale. Even health inspectors in later centuries complained about tavern straw harboring fleas, spilled ale, and several life choices no broom could undo. But by then, it was too late. Tavern straw floors were tradition. You don't argue with tradition, especially not while standing in it. So what started as a one-night aesthetic choice became a continental habit that lingered for centuries, all because someone once said, just throw some straw on it. Castle kitchens, in theory, were supposed to be carefully planned. After all, the kitchen was one of the most dangerous places in any medieval stronghold. Open flames, boiling cauldrons, sharp knives, and cooks who had been awake since dawn plotting revenge against under-seasoned meat. You'd think medieval architects would design these spaces with precision, but medieval reality was flexible. Many castle kitchens began not with a blueprint, but with a crisis. Maybe the original kitchen burned down because medieval kitchens excelled at that. Maybe the castle was under siege and they needed to cook somewhere, anywhere that wasn't currently on fire. Or maybe